Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and also a very warm welcome from my side to this seminar. I'm excited, looking forward to working with you over the coming days on differentiated integration. Yeah, so as Julia already said, I teach European politics at ETH Zurich, and have become interested in the topic many, many years ago. I think it was 2009, 2010. And I thought it would be one of the projects that you do for a couple of years and then you move on to the next topic. But it's proved to be quite sticky against my expectations. And as a field of research, and also as a field, let's say, of political debate, it's really taken off over the past years, and I think the biggest boost to research on differentiated integration has been the decision of the European Commission to fund 3 large-scale consortia researching differentiated integration, which all started, when was it, 2019, I think. And which brought together, let's say, dozens of researchers working on a field that had been a rather niche topic before, yeah, but now, I mean, we have all these studies coming out, lots of new papers, also going into new directions, so it's really a blossoming field, you could say, of study in European integration. Okay, so as I said, there are quite a few ways of defining differentiated integration. Let's say in the context of recent studies of differentiated integration, as I said, I mean, there's not a single definition, there's not a single way of approaching the topic, but I think we've made some progress in understanding where the concepts differ. And I will just provide you with a kind of conceptual tree that we can use to approach the topic and the concept a bit more and see what different types of differentiation there might be. So indeed, what we've started with is integration, because this is what you actually need to start with, yeah. Differentiated is an adjective, and first you need to have a common understanding of what you mean by integration. Here we start from a rather simple, say, legal way of looking at it, which is which is an agreement, yeah, on common rules in the European Union. Yeah, so and then these rules, yeah, that are agreed in the context of the European Union, they can be uniform or differentiated. And when we speak about uniform integration, what we mean is that EU rules are equally valid in all of the member states and in the member states only. Yeah? So that's the second part that is important. So when we then speak about differentiated integration from this, let's say, more legalistic approach, we mean that EU rules, commonly agreed legal rules in the European Union, are not equally valid in all of the member states and are not equally invalid in non-member states, which means that some non-member states adopt these EU rules. Yeah? So that's also differentiated integration. You could also say, and that was close to what someone suggested a couple of minutes ago, you could also say that the validity of EU rules is not congruent with the membership. of the European Union. Yeah? So that's a very concise way of defining differentiated integration. Yeah? So let's say in the European Union, uniform integration still is pretty much the norm. Yeah? It's the ideal. It's how this integration was meant to be. Yeah? You don't find in the treaties anything specific about differentiated integration. Yeah? So there is, especially in the early treaties, yeah, there's no, it's not a principle of European Union law. Yeah? For those of you who are lawyers, there are these principles like proportionality and what have you, subsidiarity and all that. Differentiation is not one of those. Yeah? So it's, say the ideal of European integration was always that, and that's of course the idea of the law to start with, that it is uniformly applicable to all the member states. Yeah? So differentiation in the European Union came in, say, through practice, yeah, rather than through doctrine. Okay, so so the interest in differentiated integration comes from the fact that, let's say, in spite of this norm, yeah, that integration should be uniform, practice is different. Yeah, we have rules that are not equally valid in all member states, and we have rules that are also valid, legally valid, yeah, in non-member states. And this is actually then the distinction between external and internal differentiation. Yeah? So we speak of internal differentiation when EU rules are not equally valid in all member states. Yeah? So when individual member states do not participate in specific EU policies. That's a different way of putting it. Whereas external differentiation means that non-member states buy into specific policies, selectively integrate, yeah, into the European Union's rules and policies without becoming members, of the European Union. So this is, I think these terms, external, internal differentiation, they are pretty standard now, widely used, and we've also organized the seminar a little bit around these concepts, yeah? Having one day focusing on internal, one day focusing on external differentiation. So then this is also, let's say, an interesting layer of conceptualization. Let's say in the work that we have done, that I've done with others, we've really focused on de jure differentiation. Yeah, so where it's actually in the legal text, yeah, that individual member states are exempt, yeah, from certain rules, yeah, where it's legally codified that some rules are not applicable, yeah, in some of the member states, or where non-member states actually signed a legally binding agreement, yeah, making them subject to European Union rules. Yeah? So really focusing on, let's say, the law rather than practice. But there are actually quite a few studies that look at what one could call de facto differentiation. So there is differentiation beyond what we find, let's say, in the written legal texts. Yeah? So differentiation in practice. And there, it basically comes in two forms. Yeah? One is actually very similar to non-compliance, yeah? Where there is a legal obligation to participate in an EU policy or to apply a certain EU rule, but states just don't do that. Yeah? They don't comply. And of course, one has to be careful, yeah? Because there has always been non-compliance in the European Union, and it's also a persistent, almost constitutive feature that there is non-compliance, of course. Recently, some people have tried to draw some lines between what they consider non-compliance as opposed to de facto differentiation. Yeah, so one of the authors, Tobias Hofelich, has said, okay, it needs to be sustained non-compliance, which basically comes after after all of the legal steps, yeah, coming with infringement procedures have been gone through and states still do not comply. Yeah? Think of Poland's, at least until recently, upheld decision, yeah, not to comply with EU rulings on the disciplinary chamber, yeah, for judges. This is of course not de jure differentiation, yeah, because there's nothing in the law that exempts Poland, yeah, from applying rule of law standards, yeah, but still we have a persistent pattern of non-compliance, yeah, which is intentional, yeah, and stable. Yeah, we'll see how this will develop in the future. Yeah, but this could qualify as de facto differentiation beyond non-compliance. Matisse mentioned the interesting case of Sweden and the Eurozone. Yeah, so Sweden has a legal obligation to introduce the euro, as have Poland and Hungary and the Czech Republic and others. Yeah. Is it non-compliance? Well, of course, Sweden uses a legal trick here. Yeah, so one of the convergence criteria that you need to meet before you're eligible to join the Eurozone is the so-called European Exchange Rate Mechanism 2, yeah, something again very nerdy. Sweden, of course, meets all of the requirements, the economic conditions very well, yeah, but by not joining the ERM2, yeah, it formally doesn't qualify. Yeah. So is it non-compliance? Is it, I mean, it's certainly de facto differentiation. It is, I mean, it's formally, legally okay. Yeah? There's nothing that the European Union could do about that. Yeah? And of course, other countries might go for de facto differentiation just by not meeting some of the requirements if they don't want to. Yeah? So it's again a bit of a gray zone. Actually, in our studies, we always coded that as de jure differentiation. Yeah, we did not make that that distinction because it's also something that, in contrast to cases like Poland's disciplinary chamber, it's basically accepted, yeah, by the rest of the Union that, okay, because of the referendum and there's no way to coerce Sweden into adopting the euro. Okay, so de facto, de jure. So the other big chunk of de facto differentiation is what you talked about. Yeah, it's this is sometimes called flexible implementation or discretionary implementation. So, I mean, even let's say generally equally binding EU rules very often offer the member states a lot of discretion when it comes to the implementation of these rules. Yeah, that's of course the hallmark of framework legislation. Yeah, and we see, yeah, that implementation differs, can be flexible, can be different means, yeah, that countries can use in order to implement EU rules. That also creates some de facto differentiation. Yeah? But this is again something that is now being looked at a little bit more. Yeah. So, for instance, in our consortium in the VU, we had a whole work package looking at flexible implementation, and we tried to find out how it relates to formal differentiated integration. There's also what people call experimentalist governance, yeah, which is basically an ongoing process of negotiating the way that EU rules are being implemented and changed in the process. So there is generally a lot of flexibility in the system. Yeah? But again, for the purpose of making the study of differentiated integration something distinct and not to make it a catch-all concept that comprises non-compliance and flexibility in implementation, we decided to stick, let's say, with the de jure dimension of it and say, okay, there's other ways of flexibility in the system, yeah? Other ways of dealing with heterogeneity among the member states, but let's keep the concept of differentiated integration distinct and manageable. Okay, and the next step is that we distinguished treaty-based and legislative differentiation. Yeah, so this is again a purely say legal distinction. So we have differentiated integration in the treaties of the European Union, but also in, let's say, the ordinary legislation, we can find that. And then we studied both accession treaties and, let's say, the main treaties of the European Union. And as I will argue later, it's an important distinction to understand different logics of differentiation in the European Union. Yeah. So, but let's say the most important distinctions here are between external and internal, de facto and de jure differentiation. And just to be clear, what I will be talking about here today and tomorrow is, I think, yeah, I will just be talking about de jure internal differentiation, yeah? And then we will have sessions on external differentiation, but we will not go too much into these de facto branches of differentiation. Just to be clear and just so you know, we're on the same page. Okay. So then we can distinguish different modes of differentiation. Yeah? And you've probably all heard a couple of labels that are floating around, yeah? A couple of nice metaphors also. So one that's very common is multi-speed Europe. These labels are being used in political discourse often without a clear distinction or clear understanding what they actually mean. Yeah, so a little bit interchangeably, yeah, without a clear distinction. Yeah, and of course also they come, let's say, with different connotations. Yeah. So when people speak about core Europe, yeah, that's sometimes used as kind of a negative term, yeah, as if there's a core group that wants to keep the others out, yeah. When it's two-speed or multi-speed, that's usually a much more positive connotation, yeah. So giving everyone the time they need and want, yeah, to reach a common goal. Europa à la carte is also sometimes used a bit negatively, yeah. So it's a bit of a pick and choose whatever you want, yeah. So in political discourse, these terms are, I say, often used actually as political terms with their different connotations. So what of course we should also try to do is say find a more scientific conceptualization and clearly distinguish these modes without having political connotations too early. And as you rightly said, I mean, a person who has pioneered this is Alexander Stubb in the context of a PhD dissertation he did at the EUI in the mid-1990s. Of course, he has done other things in between, but is actually now back to the EUI running this transnational school of governance, or however it is called. But I mean, he has really pioneered that, and we've basically built on his conceptualization. Yeah. So, and I've tried to interpret these terms a bit graphically too, and changed their terminology a little bit to make it more comparable. So, when we speak about multi-speed differentiation, it means we start with differentiated integration. So we have different groups of countries being at different levels of integration. Yeah? But the idea is that after some time, yeah, all member states will say that after some time we will actually reach uniform integration. All member states will adopt. So it's just a matter of time, yeah, until differentiated integration becomes uniform integration. So the next type, which is often associated with core Europe, yeah, is what we call multi-tier differentiated integration, and here the idea is that this is durable differentiation. Yeah, this is not. I mean, of course, it might disappear, but it's not intended to disappear. But we will have stable differentiation, basically, as you said, ordered by space. Yeah, so we have defined groups of countries, yeah, or defined concentric circles. Yeah, so the idea is you have this core Europe, yeah, which is blue here, and then you might have a kind of semi-periphery, yeah, which is yellow here, and a periphery. And as you move out from the core, yeah, the more differentiation you will have. Yeah, so the idea is the core will apply all the European Union's rules. So actually here you have uniform integration in the core, but then you have rather stable groups with decreasing levels of integration as you move from the inside out. Yeah? It doesn't mean that countries cannot change, cannot move within these circles, yeah? But overall the idea is that the circles will remain, yeah? Even if you have movement in or out. Yeah? But the idea is the idea of multi-tier differentiated integration is that you have, say, a stable European order, yeah, in which countries are differentially integrated, and where you have something like a core periphery distinction when it comes to the institutional integration of the states. Yeah. And of course, here you could also see that as moving from internal to external differentiation. Yeah. So this is very compatible with the idea that you have maybe a core Europe here. You have this yellow ring, which is a ring of internal differentiation, and then maybe you have one or two further circles, yeah, of external differentiation, where countries selectively buy into European policies but are not even member states. Yeah. What it comes to in the end, yeah, that is the combination of heterogeneity and unanimous decision making. Yeah. I mean, if you have a heterogeneous society, but you can still make majority decisions, yeah, you can overcome that. I mean, in nation states, we sometimes have quite polarized camps. Yeah? Think again of the United States, yeah, which is a highly polarized country, but then you make a majority decision in the election of the president, where one camp wins and the other one loses. Yeah, of course it creates tensions, as we see, but you have majority decisions to overcome the heterogeneity. Yeah. In the European Union, you don't have that. As long as decision-making on the most important issues, yeah, the constitutional issues, remains unanimous, yeah, heterogeneity becomes an issue. Yeah? Let's say the more you move toward majority decision-making, the less heterogeneity becomes an issue. Yeah? And of course, when you need unanimous decisions, one outlier preference, yeah, or one outlier capacity can basically undermine the agreement of all members. Yeah? That's why I try to insist. Yeah, everyone speaks of heterogeneity, but it's heterogeneity in the institutional context of the European Union, where basic constitutional decisions require unanimity. That makes heterogeneity such a big issue. Yeah? Correct, it's also larger heterogeneity than in most of the member states. It's also that, let's say, what we call in political science, the loser's consent is much less present in the European Union. Let's say it's much harder to swallow that a majority can impose their decisions on you when this majority is a majority of a group of countries rather than your own country, and so the social underpinnings of a majoritarian decision-making are definitely not there. Yeah, but it's this institutional context, yeah, that makes it so difficult. And what we see in the development in the history of European integration is indeed, yeah, that we started out with a small group of rather homogeneous member states, yeah, where, let's say, the interests were rather closely aligned, socioeconomic differences were not extremely pronounced. European integration has also started out with a narrow set of policies, yeah, on which all the original members could agree on. Yeah, in the early 1950s, they could not agree on defense, yeah, so that failed, but they could agree on building. They first could agree on coal and steel, yeah, and then they could agree on building an internal market. But since then, yeah, the European Union has developed in two directions. First, it has enlarged its membership, and with each enlargement, it has become more heterogeneous, yeah, both in terms of, let's say, integration preferences, yeah, and for some the original sin was letting in the UK, yeah. But definitely also with northern enlargement, there was a different set of ideas about where European integration should go than we see it in the south. But also heterogeneity of capacities, yeah, so the divergence between rich and poor member states has increased over time with everything that comes with it in terms of policy preferences or the capacity to implement policies. Plus, the European Union has expanded beyond, let's say, the consensual policies of the internal market into more contested policies that and some of you mentioned that are related to what's called core state powers, yeah, where some member states are happy or happier to transfer competences to the European Union than others. And at the same time, there is a general consensus, yeah, that when it comes to basic decisions, treaty making, the EU will not move away from the principle of unanimity. Yeah, I mean, if it had decided at some point, okay, for treaty changes we give up the principle of unanimity, yeah, differentiated integration would become much less important than it is now. Yeah. But since it has expanded its membership, expanded its policies, expanded its supranational competences, while keeping this basic principle of unanimous decision-making. This is what has made differentiated integration such an important instrument of still being able to move ahead with differentiated integration. So this is what creates the basic demand, yeah, for differentiated integration. And then, of course, we can distinguish different heterogeneities, so the idea is you will have uniform integration only if you have common preferences, mutual dependence, so everybody's interested in creating a European policy, and say similar capacities to actually implement European Union rules. The three of them need to come together for uniform integration to work. If let's say across the EU you have just conflicting preferences, you have no interdependence, you have no common capacities, you will have no integration, and differentiated integration, let's say the sweet spot for differentiated integration is when these are, when you have heterogeneity of all of these things, yeah? Either preferences or dependence or capacity. So you need to have, let's say, groups of countries, yeah, that share preferences, groups of countries that share interdependence, and groups of countries that have similar capacities to actually implement the policies. And these groups might diverge, yeah, but as long as you have a group of countries that is sufficiently homogeneous, yeah, within this overall heterogeneity, that allows for differentiated integration. Okay, so that's the basic demand, and it's important to keep both of these conditions in mind, heterogeneity and unanimity. So that doesn't mean that every time we have this demand, it will also be realized. Yeah, of course, that's a basic point for political decisions. Yeah, not everything for which there is a demand will be realized. There need to be supply-side factors. And let's say from a functional point of view, these are basically two, yeah, size and externalities. So as I said, as long as there's a group that shares preferences, capacities, interdependence. There is the possibility of doing differentiated integration, but this group needs to have a critical size. Yeah? Usually, I mean, if you look at differentiated integration in the EU, you just don't see 2 or 3 countries moving ahead. Yeah? We will also see that tomorrow. It's rather the other side. You have large groups of countries moving ahead and a few countries remaining outside, and that has certain reasons, yeah, having to do with economies of scale. Of course, the idea of integration is you create economies of scale by interdependent countries coming together, agreeing on a common policy to create joint benefits. Yeah? And of course, for most issues, the benefits are larger if you can integrate more countries. Yeah? Create collective goods among a larger group of countries. For just 2 or 3, it's usually not worth the effort to move ahead. So the economies of scale are important here. Also, I mean, each differentiation creates what economists call transaction costs. You need new institutions, you need to negotiate in different groups, yeah, and if it becomes too complex, it just becomes too costly. So usually it makes sense if you can bring together a large number of member states. It's also more legitimate in the European Union. So it also has stronger normative credentials if you move ahead with a large number of countries. As I said, the norm in the European Union is it should be uniform. And what you typically see in the negotiations is also that member states try a long time to achieve that consensus. Yeah? That's what they normally do. And it's only when they fail to achieve that consensus that they actually say, okay, let's move ahead with a smaller group, or they have achieved consensus and then comes a negative referendum in one of the member states. And so usually in the European Union, it's regarded as, bad behavior if some countries try to move ahead with integration without at least trying to integrate everyone else. Yeah? So in the European Union, it also creates legitimacy if you have a large number of countries moving ahead and maybe just 1 or 2 that remain outside. So size is important here as a supply side factor. Another one is externalities. I mean, as soon as you integrate at different levels, yeah, these different levels interact, yeah, and it's important. Differentiated integration works best if the 2 groups that are integrated at different levels actually are quite independent from one another, or what they do is quite independent from one another. Both positive and negative externalities can undermine differentiated integration. So what positive externalities mean is you have a group of countries that moves ahead with integration to create some kind of a collective good, yeah, for the countries that are ready to move ahead with integration. But the benefits of the collective good they create, yeah, with extra money, extra effort, also benefits those that stay outside. Yeah? That would be positive externalities. Of course, then as an insider, you think, okay, why do I spend on the policy? Why do I make the extra effort? Why do I transfer national powers to the European Union if I can have the same benefits, yeah, by staying outside? Yeah? So when you have positive externalities, then insiders have an incentive to leave, and this will create centrifugal tendencies. Yeah? So you will have lower integration in the end. On the other hand, if differentiated integration creates negative externalities, that means those countries that move ahead with integration, say, export costs, yeah, to those that remain outside, that it becomes costly not to participate. Yeah, this will create a strong incentive for the outsiders to join. Yeah, and this will also overcome differentiated integration. Will also lead to uniform integration in a kind of centripetal movement. Yeah, where we will have uniform integration at a higher level in the end. Yeah, so differentiated integration only works if externalities between the insiders and the outsiders are at least moderate, low, yeah, manageable. Yeah. When they become too large, there will be tendencies to dissolve differentiated integration. So these are, let's say, two functional considerations for differentiated integration. Let's say one of the when we started studying differentiated integration, say it was our idea that we could actually find, let's say, a single theory, yeah, that would explain differentiated integration in the EU. And say one of the things we learned while studying differentiated integration is that differentiated integration is actually differentiated. Yeah, so meaning that it does not follow a single logic, yeah, but that there are actually two different processes going on in the European Union that we can distinguish rather well with regard to policies, states, and other factors that are going on at the same time. Both create differentiated integration, but in different ways according to different drivers and with different outcomes. And this is what I will conclude the lecture with today, and I will go through them rather quickly, yeah, and we will pick this up tomorrow and see how it plays out in reality. One is what we call instrumental differentiation, and here the idea is, well, this is driven by a heterogeneity of economic preferences and capacities. Yeah? So one of the major heterogeneities that have developed in the European Union is between richer and poorer member states, those with strong administrative, fiscal, economic capacity, and those with, say, lower state capacity, lower administrative, fiscal, and so on capacity, and that creates a fundamental heterogeneity in the European Union. And instrumental differentiation pits basically these two groups of countries against each other: the wealthy, high-capacity countries versus the poorer, low-capacity countries. So in instrumental differentiation, it's the poorer you are as a member state, the more differentiated your membership becomes. Yeah? But this is not a general feature of differentiated integration in the EU. This is what we find as a result of enlargement. This is the kind of differentiated integration that we find in accession treaties. Yeah? And why do we find it there? Because when it's about, in negotiations about the accession of new member state, it's the old member states that have the highest bargaining power. Yeah? Usually countries that want to join want that a lot more than member states want new countries to become members. Yeah? So bargaining power is with the old members, And the strongest bargaining power is with those old members that like the idea of enlargement least. And usually these are the, say, the wealthier old member states. Yeah, if you think of the current discussions about enlargement, yeah, who are the skeptics? Yeah, it's usually northern member states that don't like the idea of all these poor countries coming in, so they would have to pay more. It's also, some of the old member states that do not want to share their funding from the budget with even poorer new member states. Yeah? So for that reason, old member states have an incentive if they do not want to or cannot prevent enlargement in the first place, to make sure that poorer new member states do not participate in all of the EU's policies from the start. Yeah? And these are the policies that are economically sensitive. It's about migration, it's about the cohesion funds, it's about agriculture. So typically you find in these accession treaties the exclusion of poor member states from economic benefits of membership. Yeah? We've talked about the free movement of labor, yeah, which is usually something that old member states ask for to make sure that there's no mass migration from poorer to richer countries. It's also the phasing in of subsidies. Yeah? A typical feature is that when it comes to agricultural, to the common agricultural policy, that the new member states do not get all of the benefits right at once, yeah? But in Eastern enlargement it was a 10-year period in which that was phased in. But typically what we see here is temporary differentiation, multi-speed. Yeah? So you do not find a permanent exclusion of new member states from any European policy in the accession treaties. It all comes with a deadline. Yeah? So because in the end the idea is that all member states, when they are full member states, have the same rights. And we see that in this logic we find instrumental differentiation, so temporary exclusion of poorer member states in the domain of the market. Yeah? So it's the free movement, the market freedoms, and it is some expenditure policies, mainly agriculture. And here we have if you want to relate it to integration theories, this is a very functionalist idea. Yeah? So we have member states with different interdependencies, different economic preferences and capacities, and institutions respond to that heterogeneity of member state preferences and capacities, yeah? And you find a functional solution, yeah, that creates some kind of a bargaining solution that all participants can live with and that all benefit from. Yeah? So the other type of differentiation is what we call constitutional differentiation. And here, it's not about economic preferences and capacities. Yeah? This is about, let's say, ideas about European integration. So heterogeneity of ideological preferences. Do you want the European Union basically to be a big single market, yeah, as was the UK idea? It's also something that you find in Denmark and Sweden. Or do you want the European Union to become, let's say, a supranational polity covering all kinds of policies, yeah, which is, say, a more federalist idea that you don't find that much anymore, but which used to be quite commonplace in countries like Italy or Germany. Yeah? And this has to do with fundamental differences of national identity in the member states. And here, the big divide is between what I call the wealthy Eurosceptic countries and the integration-friendly states. So it's not just Eurosceptic countries, but you need to be wealthy too, because only if you're wealthy you can say no. Yeah, say Greeks are quite nationalist too, yeah, and also don't like too much the idea of supranational integration. They just cannot afford to say no. Yeah, they basically need the European Union, so they want to be integrated. So it's wealthy Eurosceptic that we usually find in the north, yeah, of Europe, versus the integration-friendly states that we find to a large extent in the center and in the south of Europe. And here, constitutional differentiation is what we find in the revisions of the main treaties, and so here this is about deepening. Yeah? This is not about widening of the European Union. It's not about enlargement. It's about giving the European Union additional powers, Europeanizing, so to say, additional policies. And why is constitutional differentiation feasible? Yeah, because when you have negotiations on a revision of the treaties, bargaining power is with the status quo member states. So it's with those member states that want the European Union to change the least. Yeah? So they will be the first to use a veto if European integration becomes more supranational than they like. So these countries have the power to say, okay, either we veto the new treaty altogether, yeah, or you give us an opt-out, yeah, and so they can bargain to say, okay, if we let you move ahead, you cannot force us to be part of it. Yeah. So here we find not the exclusion of some members, but actually exemptions for some of the member states. And these are exemptions for the most Eurosceptic and nationalist countries that have, let's say, the strongest national identity. And this differentiation then tends to be durable, multi-tier, because these ideological preferences and identity don't change much over time. They are quite stable. Yeah? For that reason, we also find that constitutional differentiation is quite stable. It's also dynamic, yeah? So that as the EU develops further, these differences remain. And this applies to policies that we usually group under core state powers, which is defense, so internal, external security, borders, migration, judicial cooperation, yeah, everything that has to do with the core powers of the state, also taxation, welfare, yeah, where say core areas of state sovereignty are affected, and this is quite in line, let's say, with a post-functionalist take on European integration, which starts from the assumption that in the integration process, communities, national communities, have a basic preference in preserving their self-determination. Yeah? So this is not so much about getting functional benefits here and there, reducing costs, gaining economies of scale, but it's about preserving the self-determination of the national community that drives this logic. Yeah? So to conclude for today, and we will continue talking about these issues tomorrow, the main point here is indeed that differentiated integration in the EU comes in two quite distinct varieties. Yeah? It's driven by two different logics. Yeah? And we can associate these logics with quite different features. It affects different groups of countries. It is rooted in different heterogeneities. We can find it in different legal documents. It differs with regard to the mode of differentiation, multi-speed, multi-tier. It differs with regard to the policies in which we find differentiation, and it's also underpinned by different theories of European integration.